Welcome back to our Talmud table. I'm going to be pointing a few things out, but along with the video portion of this, there's going to be along the side, you'll be able to see on some documents, I'll be pointing out things so that you'll have a better view of what I'm saying. So this will be simultaneous to my talking. There'll be a display, which you'll see soon enough. Again, we're introducing ourselves to what's on a page of Talmud. We're in the Talmud Bavli, the Babylonian Talmud. We're in the tractate of Brachot, blessings. And we're going to turn to this is the very first page of Talmud, and we're going to use this as our instructional page. And as I mentioned yesterday, and you can see simultaneously along with the guide, the Talmud is this center section. It's composed of Mishnah and Gemara. Most of it is Gemara. So just to give you an example, this part right here is the Mishnah. I'm now going to turn pages until we get to the next Mishnah, so that everything in the center section you're going to see on all of these pages until we reach the next Mishnah is the Gemara, is the Talmudic commentary on the Mishnah. Right, so here we are, here is the Mishnah on one page. So follow along in the center section and you'll see, again, this isn't a perfect ratio, but it'll give you an idea of the ratio that you sometimes see between the Mishnah itself and how much of it is Gemara. Again, Mishnah, just as a reminder, the Mishnah was composed or redacted in the 2nd century of the Common Era, and then the Talmud was developed over several centuries, successive centuries. Here is the Mishnah. And now I'm just going to start turning pages so you can see how much Talmud there is relative to that little bit of Mishnah. This, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and this. We're getting closer, and this. And you get the idea, this and this. This is a little bit larger than the normal ratio. Here, and here, and we will finally get to another Mishnah soon enough on the back side, I believe, of this page. There it is. So you can see that the ratio of Mishnah to Talmud is pretty significantly large. Let me go to another section just to share with you that ratio, a little bit more of a balanced one. Here is the Mishnah. It's only about 3-4 lines, and here is Talmud, Talmud on that, Talmud on that. We're still in the Talmud on that Mishnah, still in the Talmud on that Mishnah, and then we get to another Mishnah over here. So you can see that the ratio between Mishnah and Gemara is rather large. The reason for that is that the Mishnah was intended, it was the first time, Mishnah was the first time that anything from the oral Torah was written down into a text that was meant to be shared. So the goal was to make it as concise as possible. And the Talmud then elaborates not only on the Mishnah by trying to understand the source for the laws in the Mishnah and trying to understand what the Mishnah says and trying to understand how the laws here fit into other laws, but along with all of that, the Talmud then also has sections where it explains verses in the Torah or just gives general wisdom. So you get this very large ratio because the Talmud is first going to discuss the legal material of the Mishnah, and then it's going to discuss everything else. To give you a real feel for the balance between the two, the best place to look, which we mentioned yesterday as well, is the commentary of the Rif and the Rabbeinu Yonah. So I'm going to take you back into the latter part of the book, and this is the Rabbeinu Yonah's commentary. This middle section, which looks like the Gemara, is actually a condensed version of the Gemara, and it was put together to be only the halachic material. So now let's watch for the balance between the two. Here is the Mishnah. Here is this is halachic material on that Mishnah quoted from the Talmud. And you'll see that the balance is much more even. Here and here, and then finally we get to another Mishnah here. So you can see that the balance is, in terms of the Jewish legal halachic material, that the balance is a little bit closer. Having said all of that, so now I want to study a page of Talmud, right? The problem with starting a page of Talmud is that besides what it says on the Talmud page, the Talmud text itself is assuming that we know a great deal of classic Jewish literature, which may or may not be true. So for example, the Talmud will quote verses from the Bible. Now, if you know the Bible by heart, you'll know exactly what they're quoting. Or the Talmud will say something here and then say something in another place, say similar or same thing somewhere else. You want to cross-reference between the two. Well, if you know the Talmud by heart, you can do that. If you can't, what are you supposed to do then? So the Talmud actually on its page, and I'll be using the guide page momentarily and extensively to show you some of these things, but the Talmud on the page has reference tools to help you along. I'm going to show you the reference tools using the page, although some of them are slightly different than the way they're printed in this Talmud. Again, as the printing of the Talmud evolves, certain earlier conventions which made sense then make less sense now because we have the ability to compute a typeset. It's much easier to squeeze things into the margins of the page. And again, let's talk about the margins of the page. Right? So here we have the Talmud, the Mishnah and the Talmud, Rashi's commentary, Tosfot commentary. We'll talk a little bit more of those when we get there. And then you've got a lot in the margins. So you see that things are getting jammed into the margins every which way. Down here, down here. They're jamming things into the margins so you have all the references on the page that you need. So let's take a look at some of these reference tools. One of them, and I'll discuss it as it's done in the old style Talmud, although I'll be pointing to it in a newer edition. In newer edition, this particular tool, these two particular tools that I'm going to mention first, they've been put into the margins, but for the moment. So one is known as the Torah Or. The Torah Or tells you where you can find a particular quote in the Bible. So the Talmud begins by asking what the source is for the mitzvah of reciting the Shema. What's the source in the Bible? And the Talmud tells us that the source is the words from the Shema, B'shach b'cho v'kumecha, when you lay down and when you get up. We say the Shema in the evening, we say the Shema in the morning. Where is that verse found? There's a tiny little circle here which would tell you to go to, in this little margin here, it tells you to go to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6. Another example here, it quotes Vayer Vayiboker Yom Echad from the very beginning of the Bible and creation. You can find that in Genesis chapter 1. So anytime that the Bible is quoted, the Talmud will refer you, the printed Talmud will tell you where to look in the Bible to find that quote. Similarly, if something is referenced elsewhere in the Talmud, it will be cross-referenced. So for example, the Mishnah here in discussing the mitzvah of Shema, the Mishnah tells us anything which the rabbis declare that the mitzvah must be done by midnight, they're just protecting you, but the true Torah commandment was until the morning. Let's not worry about exactly what that means now, but this is referred to elsewhere in the Talmud. So there's an asterisk in the text of the Talmud that moves you to the inner margin. The inner margin is known as the Masoros Hashas on the page that we're using as an accompaniment. It's been moved elsewhere, and I'm showing you where it is on that page, but it's cross-referencing all of the places in the Talmud where you can find this same quote. So that if you want to understand it in a different context, or here it's only quoted and explained lightly and you want to see a fuller explanation, you could in theory move to any number of the other citations in the Talmud. Without these tools, you would have to know the Bible by heart and you'd have to know the Talmud by heart, which is quite an undertaking. Okay, there are other reference tools as well. You'll see sometimes in parentheses, as Rashi or Tosfos are quoting something, in parentheses it'll tell you where to find it. So whereas Tosfos will tell you later on in the tractate you'll find this particular quote, inside the text of the Tosfot, in parentheses, they'll tell you where in the tractate to find that quote, or where in another tractate to find that quote, so that you can easily cross-reference. The final major tool, which is really worth, or I would say two that are really worth discussing. Let's go to the bottom of the page. It's known as the Gilyon Hashas, and in the Gilyon Hashas you have many textual amendations that were made in order to refine the text of the Talmud. The text of the Talmud was for many generations copied by hand, obviously, before the printing press, and sometimes errors would creep in. So the Gilyon HaShas, the Hagos, Habach, another one of the reference tools, will occasionally make a correction so that you can read the Talmud more accurately. The final and very important reference tool is known as the Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah. The Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah tells you where you can find the subject being discussed here, or a ruling made in the Talmud, where you can find that in the classic codes of Jewish law. It'll tell you where to find it in Maimonides' code, in something known as the Sefer Mitzvos Gedolos, a less used reference, but an important reference, as well as in the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch, in the code of Jewish law. It will tell you, oh, the subject here is described, you can find it there. So for example, our Mishnah begins by asking, when can you read the Shema in the evening, to fulfill the mitzvah of the evening Shema? And it says, from the time that the Kohanim come in to eat their Truma, which is Tzeis HaKochavim, nightfall, okay, whatever the details are. And there's a little letter here, which you can't easily see from there, but there's a little letter here, and that little letter tells you to come up to the Ein Mishpat Ner Mitzvah, where it will tell you that you can find this law referenced in Maimonides' codes in his law of Kriya Shema, and in the first chapter, the 9th law, as well as you can find it in the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch, in the codes of Jewish law, and it tells you to look for chapter 235, subsection 1, in the Code of Jewish Law, and you will see where this is discussed practically in Jewish law. In this way, with the Talmud and all of its reference tools, the Talmud really becomes a conduit to, the printed page of the Talmud becomes a conduit to almost the entire expanse of Jewish law, by telling you not only the text of the Talmud, but where to find verses, where to cross-reference, where to find it in the Code of Jewish law. And the reason why this is so significant and so important is because when one studies something in Jewish law, almost always there are going to be differing opinions and differing sources, and you're going to have to be able to synthesize all of those. So if you're studying in the Talmud and you want to know where the practical law is, you know where to look. Mind you, if you're studying the Code of Jewish law and you want to know where it's to be found in the Talmud, those reference points are also on the page, those reference tools. And in this way, these books can cross-reference, and you can appreciate, or at least know where to look in the long, I would say if you're reading the Talmud, at least 1,500 years of Jewish intellectual history, and be able to understand where to look and cross-reference, etc. So all of this is going on a page of the Talmud. There's a lot going on. A couple of final notes. We know where we are in the Talmud. How do we know where we are? Well, first of all, at the top of the page, it will tell you 3 things. Leftmost here, it tells you the name of the tractate. Here, in the middle, it'll tell you which chapter in the tractate you're in. And over to the right, it tells you the name of the chapter. Each chapter is given a name. Also, to assist in referencing, it's given a name to help you along. So along the top here, it tells you you're in the tractate of Brachot, blessings, first chapter, otherwise known as Me'emosai. Over here in the upper left-hand corner is a page number. Now, it's really not a page number, it's a folio number, right? Page numbers would mean that if this was page bet, page 2, this would be page 3, but it's not. As a matter of fact, this is page 3, folio 3. Folio refers to both sides of the page, and in classic Talmud reference, if I want to know what page I'm on, I take a look. So this is Daf Bet, Aleph Bet, second. Daf Aleph is the Shar, is the opening page. So Daf Bet, and this is side 1. Folio 2, side A. This is folio 2, side B. This is folio 3, if you can see the Gimel. This is folio 3, side 1. Folio 3, side 2. In this way, once the printing of the Talmud was standardized so that this material appears on the first page, on page Bet Amud Aleph, folio 2, side A, was standardized so that this was the material there, you now had an easy way to reference anything in the Talmud. Before that, you really had to rely on things like telling me what chapter it was in. So often you'll see in Tosfos will tell you in the first chapter, in the third chapter, in the 8th chapter. That's because the standardized printing of the text didn't really happen until Vilna, somewhere in the 19th century. In Vilna, you ended up with the final sort of standardized page. So now when we refer to a page in the Talmud, and I say, oh, let's take a look at page Chaf Daled Omid Aleph for a particular thing, everybody has the same Daf Chaf Daled Omid Aleph. As a matter of fact, in more recent printings, and give me a second here to step away from the camera and I'll be right back. In more recent printings of, and here's two examples, in more recent printings of the Talmud, where, let's say, here's a printing, a Hebrew English. So you need a lot more pages of English in order to be able to explain the Hebrew. So instead of condensing the page, which would therefore throw out the page numberings and the references, you'll see in an Art Scroll Talmud, they'll print the entire page on each page. So they're printing all of this, even though the part that's being referred to here is only the bottom 3 lines. They do that to preserve the important standardization of page numbers in the Talmud. Okay, that was a lot. Same thing here in the Koren Talmud. The Koren Talmud, which doesn't use the classical layout at all, although you can find it in the back, they do give it to you. But in their English translation, they don't use the classical layout at all. But at the bottom of the page, they will tell you that you are in chapter 8 on folio 52b. Now that might also be true on the next page. This is still folio 52b. Page 52, folio B, whatever, folio 52. I don't know exactly how to say it, as you can see. But when the page turns over, they'll let you know, hey, you've come to what in the Vilna Shas, what in here would be folio 53, side A.